All right, get this. Can you imagine a company suing its own customer just to prove a sale they already made never actually happened? I know, it sounds completely insane, right? But that's the bizarre, real-life legal puzzle we're going to unravel today. So yeah, let's just dive right in. We're talking about a major pet company, Ku and Riku, and they filed one of the absolute weirdest lawsuits I've ever seen. And it all comes down to this one simple, totally baffling question.
Okay, Section 1, a truly bizarre lawsuit. And the subtitle says it all, the company's core argument against its own sale. I mean, just to be crystal clear here, this wasn't them getting sued. No. The company chose to file this thing. Their whole goal, to get a judge to say that a sale they'd already made just poof, didn't exist legally.
So their main argument had two parts. The first one was, kind of weak, something about the store manager just backing out. But it's their second point, this unique legal theory. That's what launches this whole thing from a simple disagreement straight into the Twilight Zone. This is where it gets really wild. Okay, so here's the core of their completely bonkers logic. They basically argue that even if one of their employees says, yep, we'll sell you this puppy, and you say, great, I'll take it, and you even put money down, that's not a real sale. Now, in normal contract law, that's called offer and acceptance. It means the deal is done. But according to these guys, nope. They claimed their actual intent to sell doesn't magically appear until the very, very last piece of their internal paperwork is signed. Everything before that, totally meaningless. And this comparison just hits the nail on the head. It's like proposing to someone, planning the whole wedding, standing there at the city office, and then saying, by the way, I haven't actually decided if I want to marry you yet. I'll decide after we file the official license. It makes absolutely no sense, right? It just flips the whole idea of an agreement completely upside down. All right, on to Section 2, unraveling a fabricated story. And here we're looking at the company's secondary excuse and how it just falls apart. So maybe they realized their first argument was, a little too out there, so they came up with a backup plan, something that sounds a lot more believable. They claimed the whole deal fell through because the customer refused to sign a document. But you gotta ask, is that really what happened? I mean, on the surface, it sounds like a pretty standard he said, she said kind of thing. A simple disagreement over the terms, right? Well, when you actually look at the timeline, the facts tell a very, very different story. Okay, and this timeline is everything. So look, on October 4th, they tell the customer all about the puppy's health risks and this memorandum they have to sign. Got it. Then, on October 8th at 9:32 in the morning, the customer sends an email saying, yep, I'm in, I'll buy the puppy, knowing full well what the terms are. Boom! Legally, that sale is complete. But then, just a few hours later, the pet shop calls and suddenly says, oh, the puppy's sick, we have to delay, and it's not until a whole month later that they officially cancel. See? The facts just show the memorandum was never the problem. So that brings us to Section 3, the simple proof of malice. And the subtitle here is How the Lawyer's Own Strategy Revealed the Lie. And this is where it gets really interesting, because here's the thing. If the company's lawyer genuinely believed his own story, that the customer refused to sign that document, he had an incredibly simple, almost guaranteed way to win this case. Think about it. The lawyer himself even said the burden of proof was on the buyer. So all he had to do was this. Step 1, claim the buyer refused to sign. Step 2, challenge the buyer to show any proof that the deal was still on after that supposed refusal. That's it. He could have just kicked back and said, show me the evidence, knowing they wouldn't have any. It should have been the easiest win of his career. But they didn't do that, did they? Instead, they chose this unbelievably weird path. And you have to ask yourself, why? Well, the only conclusion that makes any sense is that they knew their story about the memorandum was a total lie. They knew the buyer had proof the sale was a done deal, so they couldn't risk taking that simple path. They had to invent this crazy company-wide rule as a desperate attempt to make the buyer's evidence irrelevant. Which leads us right into Section 4, 3 theories of motivation. We're going to explore the psychology behind this self-defeating strategy. Because this really is the mystery at the heart of this whole thing, right? Why on earth would a lawyer pick a strategy that was not just dishonest, but was also so obviously going to hurt his own client? And you have to remember, we're talking about a sale that was only worth about $1,300. This isn't some huge corporate lawsuit. The stakes were so low. But the legal strategy they chose was incredibly high risk. So what was driving this? Let's explore some of the possible motivations. Well, analysis suggests it probably wasn't just one single thing.
It was likely a mix. So if we look at the theories, they're pretty evenly split. About a 40% chance it's just numbed senses, meaning this kind of unethical stuff has just become routine for him. Another 40% chance it's the game-like thrill. He just loved the challenge of trying to win a case that seemed unwinnable. And then there's a smaller 20% possibility that he was offered some kind of huge special bonus, way more than the puppy was worth. And this brings us to our final section, number 5, a dangerous precedent for everyone. Why this bizarre case matters to every single consumer. Because you might be listening to this and thinking, okay, that's a crazy story about one puppy, but what does it have to do with me? Well, the legal idea they were pushing has some really serious implications for all of us. Just think about it. If their logic became law, a car dealer could take your deposit, shake your hand, and then turn around and sell that same car to someone who offered more money right before you came to pick it up. A store could cancel your pre-order for that hot new gadget you waited months for right at the last minute. Basically, any company could use its own secret internal procedures to cancel a deal they made with you anytime, for any reason, with no consequences. The whole idea of a sales agreement would become totally meaningless. So I think the big question this whole thing leaves us with is, when does a legal strategy stop being aggressive and start being just a planned scam? You know? Where is that line between a lawyer fighting hard for their client and a lawyer who's actually abusing the legal system itself to help their client steal something? It's a really fine line, and this case seems to have just pole vaulted right over it.